If you type these coordinates into Google Maps and hit enter, the map will quickly zoom in on one of the most desolate regions in western China. A few seconds later, a strange object appears in the middle of the sand, one that looks suspiciously like an aircraft carrier. You know those massive ships that act as floating military bases, complete with flight decks, fighter jets, and a whole arsenal of weapons. What we see is a long, rectangular structure with a clearly defined hull and a tapered bow, exactly the shape of a large warship. If you've ever seen an aircraft carrier from above, you'd recognize it almost instantly. So let's figure out where these coordinates have actually taken us. We're looking at the Takamakan Desert on a map. It's just a huge, pale spot between mountain ranges, but in reality, it's a true ocean of sand. It's sometimes called the Sea of Death because of its extreme temperatures, sandstorms, and a near-total lack of water. It's the kind of place you would almost never end up in by accident. So, if an object that looks like a warship shows up here, that alone is a serious reason to ask some questions. But let's go back to the satellite image. If you look closely at the shape of this structure, it becomes clear that it doesn't really look like a Chinese aircraft carrier. For comparison, here's the silhouette of a Gerald Ford-class aircraft carrier, the newest ship in the US Navy. And the weirdness doesn't stop there. A little ways away, in the same satellite imagery, you can find another object. Again, not at sea, not at a pier, but right in the middle of the sand. It's as if someone simply took the silhouette of a warship and carefully recreated it on the desert floor at a one-to-one scale. If you trace the history of these images over the years, it's clear these objects didn't appear all at once. At first, there were grids of squares, some poles, and metal structures. There's a railway that runs through the desert. At first, that might not seem unusual. Instead of a straight line, the tracks form smooth arcs and fairly sharp bends, even though there are no mountains, rivers, or any other obstacles around that could explain this layout. If you follow the railway in one direction, it leads to a small complex of buildings. If you follow the tracks in the other direction, they just disappear into the sand. But purely for the sake of movement along this bizarre route. And this is where the pieces of the puzzle start to fit together. We see full-scale silhouettes of warships in the desert that look like American ones. We see a railway with illogical curves that leads to a base and then vanishes into nowhere. All of this strongly suggests one thing: a training range for practicing strikes against the ships of a potential adversary. To understand why someone would build mock-ups of aircraft carriers and destroyers in the desert, we need to step back from the satellite images and look at the map not in satellite mode, but in geopolitical mode. For many years, there have been two major points of tension around China that regularly make the news: the South China Sea and Taiwan. In the South China Sea, several countries are in disputes over islands, reefs, and maritime borders. But each of those dots represents potential resources, control over shipping routes, and influence in the region. Over the past few years, China has poured sand onto submerged reefs, turning them into full-fledged islands with runways, radar stations, and ammunition depots. China claims rights to almost the entire area and has built artificial islands there with complete military infrastructure. In response, the United States constantly sends its ships and aircraft to the region, conducting so-called freedom of navigation operations formally to demonstrate that these waters aren't anyone's private territory. The second point of tension is Taiwan. In practice, it operates as an independent state with its own government and military. The US, in turn, isn't eager to watch a possible invasion from the sidelines and supports Taiwan, including with a military presence in the region. US carrier strike groups regularly appear near China's shores, which is clearly visible on open fleet tracking maps. On the other side of the Taiwan Strait, all of this is being watched very closely. Taiwan regularly conducts large military exercises, practicing scenarios of amphibious landings, island blockades, and missile strikes on key infrastructure. In military reports, the same idea keeps coming up in a potential conflict. It's not just the number of ships and aircraft that will matter, but also how close aircraft carriers can get and what weapons both sides have. China has its own special weapon in this game, so-called anti-ship ballistic missiles. In Western media, they're often called carrier killers. In simple terms, they work like this. The missile is launched from mainland. China climbs on a ballistic trajectory, and then the main difficulty for any defense system is that this warhead travels at extremely high speed, and its final trajectory isn't predictable. Traditional missile defense systems are designed for the more predictable behavior of conventional missiles. Intercepting this kind of warhead is a completely different level of complexity. Add in satellite constellations, radar systems, and other detection tools, and you get a weapon concept that, in theory, can hit large ships even while they are maneuvering. And this is where we remember our strange railway in the desert. An aircraft carrier mock-up placed not just on the ground, but on a movable platform that can be driven along rails. It allows for the simulation of real ship maneuvers, changing course, trying to evade a strike, speeding up or slowing down. Those track bends and sharp turns might not be an engineering mistake, but a deliberate attempt to replicate the typical movements of a vessel trying to shake off a homing warhead. But it is perfectly visible from satellites, and many experts believe this is no coincidence. And think about whether you're ready to risk your aircraft carriers by coming too close. It's important to understand that China isn't the only one doing this. Militaries in general love to create replicas of things they might encounter in a real conflict. In Soviet times, there were entire model towns where assault, defense, and evacuation scenarios were practiced. Today, you can see the same logic in other countries. In Iran, at one point, they built a copy of an American aircraft carrier and used it as a target in exercises. So, the idea of a fake object for training isn't unique. What is unique here is the scale and the context. The difference in this story is that it's not about training soldiers to enter a building or practicing aircraft landings. Here, the training is about destroying a target that, in a real conflict, would carry enormous political and military weight. The loss of an aircraft carrier isn't just a destroyed ship. It's a symbolic blow to the status and capabilities of a country that has built its strategy around these floating airfields for decades. If you imagine a hypothetical conflict around Taiwan or in the South China Sea, it becomes clear why all of this matters so much. If American aircraft carriers can approach to a comfortable distance and launch aircraft without any threat, they give the US a huge advantage. The very existence of weapons capable of threatening them already changes the calculations of both sides, even if those weapons are never used. So, we get a strange paradox. Somewhere far from the sea, in the silence of a sandy desert, lie mock-up ships that go nowhere and launch nothing. But they may turn out to be the factor that one day forces real warships to change course and politicians to recalculate their crisis scenarios. On paper, it can be called anything: a test facility, a research site, a training area. Will all of this remain a demonstration of capabilities, a game of deterrence and signaling to each other? If you found this interesting, support the video with a like and a subscription. Thank you. And there's more interesting content ahead.